Okay, so good morning. Apologies that we were unable to meet yesterday. Hopefully you watched one of either one or heard one of the recordings from our past from Rabbi Linzer, or were able to find another recording online. We today are beginning at the top of Daf Ayin Aleph, and we're going to because well, I didn't like it, but we're going to record. For today, we're going to go through basically all of Ayin Aleph and a little bit of Ayin Bet of 72, and then God willing, tomorrow will be off because of Tisha B'av, and we don't learn Torah on Tisha B'av. And then on Friday we'll try and finish Ayin Bet and do Ayin Gimel. So we won't do quite as many Rashis. I'll do more Rashi outside rather than inside today, but we've got a lot to cover. And so let me share my screen and we will get started. So the key here is that, the Mishnah that began our chapter talked about how if somebody were to become mute for a bit, and how would they be able to convey their desire to get a divorce? And we said that if they can answer questions yes and no, and they indicate with their head nodding, right? We know how to say yes and no with our heads, right? Right? Lori's doing it right now. She's saying yes with her head. Exactly. And of course we know how to say no, right? No. So as a result, if the person who's mute and obviously is able to hear because he can hear your questions, is able to respond to them appropriately. So he shows some, or she shows, in this case, he shows some understanding. Well, then we will allow him to use those same head nods to indicate that he wants to get divorced. So that's what our Mishnah said. Now we're going to talk about what if somebody was born deaf, and we in general, with a few exceptions, when we say deaf, we mean both deaf and mute, unable to speak as well.
It's like a leash door.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
They're not here.
Yeah, so we don't see her anymore. All right, but anyway, Amarav Kahana, Amarav. So this is we start at the top line of Ayin Aleph, Amud Aleph. So Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav, Chirish. And here we're talking about somebody, as Rashi explains, that was a pikeach when they got married. Let's take a look at Rashi's second line in Rashi. Shahaya pikeach kishenichnas of the kiddushav kiddushin gemurin. That when this person got married, they were originally fully capable of hearing and speaking, and so their Kedushin at that moment was a fully valid biblical marriage. And I'll note that it's important, as noted on the screen, when we learned in Yevamot, and we're going to quote it right now, B'tanan b'Yevamos, nitchareshu o nishtata, if either he becomes somebody who is a deaf and mute, or somebody who is insane, so then lo yotzi olamid, he's not able to divorce the woman forever, because the marriage that he created was a biblically enforceable marriage, and now it's only the rabbis who allow the divorce in this situation, and they can't enable a divorce that the Torah doesn't allow. Lefisha ein koch begerushay chereshus lahafkia kedushay chachma v'ka'amar Rav de'im yachol. And so what Rav is now saying is here, cherish yachol, as we go back into the Gemara, cherish yachol ledaber mitoch haksav, if somebody who is deaf and mute is able to communicate through writing, so then kozvin and osnin leget leishto, then they have the ability to cause the get to be written for his wife. So Amar of Yosef, Michael Mashmal, and why are we bothering to tell me this statement? Isn't this statement an obvious statement? Because after all, what did we say in our Mishnah? Tanina, nishtatek, if a person became mute, v'amru lo nichtav get le'ishtacha, v'hir bin barosha, v'hir kin barosho. So the person, we say should we write a get to your wife, and the person is able to nod, Bodkinoso shalosha pamim. We check them 3 times. Im amar al lav lav al hein hein. Hare elu yichtavu v'yinu. If we know that the person actually is of sound mind, that they're able to answer questions like, is it spring outside or summer outside? You know, they know what's going on around them. So then we're able to use that to write a get. Well, if in fact you can use this head signals to write a get, well then certainly if somebody writes a note and says, please write a get to my wife, we should enable the person to use that. So Amrle Rebbe Zera, Elaim Kamart. 1 second. That Mishnah is not talking about, or our Brisa is not talking. I'm sorry. The statement of Rav Kahana in the name of Rav is not talking about somebody who's just mute. That's what our Mishnah was talking about. And shiny Elaim, but Elaim is different. So the point is that our Mishnah was talking about somebody who can hear but cannot speak. And we have a rule that differentiates between one who can't hear and speak from one who can't hear but can speak, or cannot speak but can hear, because we have a brisa Tanya, that one who can speak but not hear is called a cherish. Now Rashi points out that cherish is used in 2 different ways in the Talmud. Usually when we say cherish, we mean somebody who is both deaf and mute, but at this very moment we're talking about somebody who is only deaf but not mute. And somebody who can hear but cannot speak, they are called an elaim. And for purposes of determining competency, this is not a definitive strike against them, meaning that they are considered competent for engaging in various kinds of transactions. So now the Gemara is going to try to explain where we get the names Elaim and Cherish. So let's take a look. And that which we call somebody who can speak but not hear, a Cherish, and that somebody who can hear but cannot speak is called an Elaim. We have that source in the Torah, or actually in Tehillim. Diksiv. Diksiv. Bani, it's okay. Bani cherish v'lo eshma, right? I am like a cherish who cannot hear, right? I do not hear. Uche lo yiftach piv, and like an elaim, I cannot speak. So the point is that cherish is referring to somebody who cannot hear, and elaim is referring to somebody who cannot speak. And when it comes to an elaim, we could the amri inshe. It's actually like an abbreviation, because what did we say? Ishtakel milule. His words were taken from him, and that and if you take the first letter of ishtakel and the last letter of ishtakel, that's the aleph and the lamed, and the first letter of milule, and now you have elaim. It's sort of like an abbreviation. All right, so Amar Rebbe Zera. So we've now clarified that Rebbe Zera's question, Rebbe Yosef's question, excuse me, is not really a good question. Because the elaim and the cherish are different categories. One, especially a cherish who's a deaf mute. Rav's statement that Rav Kahana reported was said about somebody who is both deaf and mute, and that shows that if that deaf mute person does have the ability to write, he will be able to communicate in a way that can enable him to get divorced. So Amar Rebbe Zera ikashili hakashili. No. What you asked, Rav Yosef, isn't really a great question, but I'll tell you the great question. Titania imlo yagid. We have in the Torah a prohibition of that if you have testimony about a contractual matter and you are asked about it, you're not allowed to say, I don't know what you're talking about. You need to testify. You can't try and lie your way out of being a witness in a case, and that is the concept of imlo yagid, that if he does not tell, then he later admits it, he's going to have to bring a special sacrifice for having sort of tried to avoid having to testify as a witness. And what is the Torah? Why does the Torah specifically tell us Yagid? So the Brisa teaches Pratla Elam She'ena Yachol Hagid. This comes to exclude that an Elam who fails to testify about something that he knows about is not considered somebody who is a false witness, or is not considered somebody who needs to bring a chatas for swearing falsely that he didn't know anything about the matter when in fact he did. So if in fact Rav is correct that writing is sufficient to instruct somebody and writing should be considered just like talking, well then why don't we say that writing is like talking in this area? So hayachol hayachol lahagi one second. Right. Amai hayachol lahagi mitoch ksav. He has the ability to testify about things through writing. So Amar le Abaye, Edus Kamart. 1 second. There's a big difference between asking somebody to write a divorce and actual testimony. Shiny Edus. Edus is different. Because the Torah specifically says, and Rashi cites this verse, al pi shnayim edim, on through the mouth of the two witnesses. So the fact that it references the mouth of the witnesses, that tells us that in fact they need to be able to speak. It's not sufficient for them to write. Okay, so Meisvei, 1 second, is it really true that writing cannot testify? Because we have the following brisa, Kashem Shabod Kenoso Legittin, just as we test a person's competence with respect to divorce, Kach Bod Kenoso, we can also testify him, Lemasa Otum Latanot, when it comes to business and gifts, Ula Edut Yerushot, and to testimony and to inheritance. So Katani Mias Adios. And here, what do we specifically list? That we're going to test somebody's competence with a mute person's competence with respect to testimony, just as we test them with respect to divorce. So doesn't that imply that the person is able to testify even if they are mute? And isn't it referring to somebody who can write their testimony down? So Amar of Yosef, Barman Yumi, Amar of Sheshus. So in the name of Rav Sheshus is explained. No, Be'edus Isha. The Edus in this particular brisa is not talking about testimony in ordinary monetary cases or other kinds of cases, but rather it's specifically about a woman, and in particular, it's in order to enable her to get married, because her husband is missing. So if we want the man to, so we would let somebody testify about the death of a husband in order to enable the woman to get married, because we want to, the akilu ba rabbanan, the rabbis are lenient in that area. And so as a result, in that area, even if a person can't speak, we would allow them to testify in writing. But in general, we would not. And so as a result, Abaye's answer is still a good answer. Well, 1 second, what about the reference to inheritance? Isn't that similarly referring to a kind of testimony about who gets to inherit? So Amar Rabbi Abau, Yerushos beno habachor. As Rashi explains, we're talking about where a person is deciding that they want all of their children to get equal inheritance. According to the Torah, the firstborn son gets a double inheritance, and the rest of the other sons, split the rest. But if somebody, and if a mute person were to want to try and have the inheritance be all equal, they would be allowed to write that, which isn't a traditional case of testimony. It's specifically about that person's own objects. And we allow a mute person to engage in transactions and the like. And so as a result, he does have the ability to change how much each child gets. And so as a result, we're not, that is not a classic case of testimony. Well, 1 second, Katani Mias Lamasos Mentanos. Well, 1 second, in the end, it still says that you can do certain, that the testimony will work with respect to business transactions and gifts. So why don't we say that when my lav alma, aren't we talking about business transactions and gifts of a third party, which is a case of real testimony, meaning that the person who's deaf, who's mute, or deaf mute is able to testify in writing in order to enable somebody to win a court case. Lo, Liddy Day, no, we're talking about in his own matters, he's allowed to testify. And so as a result, that's not really testifying. And so as a result, it is not inconsistent with Abaye's answer that testimony is different from the demand to the request to have somebody write a divorce for one's wife. Okay. So again, we're challenging. We have that was the second challenge of our of our original statement of Rav Kahana in the name of Rav, and now we have a third challenge from a brisa. So Meisvei, 1 second, we have a brisa that says Cherish lo halchu vo achar remuzosav va'achar kafitzosav va'achar ksav yado ela b'metaltin len avalo legit. 1 second, we have a specific brisa that argues with Rav Kahana in the name of Rav, because Rav said that you're allowed to write things down in order to communicate the desire to write a get, but this says that we don't follow gestures or lift movement or writing. We only follow it with respect to transactions involving movable property. But when it comes to divorce, we do not. So the Gemara answers Tanaihi. We have a general principle that Rav Tana Upalig, that Rav is allowed to disagree with Tanaim, even though he was at the very end of the Tanaic period and often considered an Amora. But we say that he was allowed to argue the Tanya, and we know that in fact there's an argument about it, because if you take a look essentially at a comment that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said in connection with that brisa is Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, B'med Dvar Mamurim. When do we say that it's only with respect to movable properties and not with respect to Gittin? B'cherish mi karo, when somebody was originally deaf, when they were born somebody who is deaf and mute. Aval pikech v'nischarish. But the case that Rav was talking about, where somebody was able to speak and then became deaf and mute, who kosev, he's able to write v'hein chosman. He can write the instructions, and then they can others can sign the get. All right. So v'cherish mi karo lo. Well, in second, that implies that somebody who was originally deaf is not able to divorce their wife. But we also have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Yevamos, Kashem shekonsa b'remiza, kach motzia b'remiza. That just as we allow a deaf mute to get married based on rabbinic law, and he does so through gesturing, so too he can get divorced through gesturing because it's also rabbinic. Well, so that's Iba Ishto Hachinami. Well, when the person does the marriage himself, that's certainly true. But Hakabamayaskinan, here, what are we talking about? Vivimto. We're talking about somebody who ended up marrying their brother's widow because their brother died without any children. So Yevimto Miman, what kind of husband was the brother? Meaning, was the brother also a deaf mute or not? So you can say maybe she came to him through a deaf mute brother. Well, in second, if she came to him from a deaf mute brother, just as the deaf mute brother started that marriage through gesturing, let this husband, let the brother also divorce the woman through gesturing. So it must be that she came to him through a brother that was able to speak and to hear. Or you could say, no, really, she came to him from a brother who is deaf mute also. And we have a gzera that we won't allow the yavam to divorce the yavama, even though she came from a brother who was deaf mute, because we're worried that in the situation where the brother could be fully capable, and so as a result, we don't want to confuse those situations, and so as a result, we're not going to let even the deaf mute brother. When the brother who passed away was deaf mute, we won't let the person divorce the wife in that situation either. Well, ihachi ishtonami. Well, in that case, why let a deaf mute person divorce anyone, even if they divorced them, even if they married them from a legitimate perspective, even if their marriage was only rabbinic? Because shouldn't we be worried that maybe we'll end up coming to allow divorce in a situation of yibum, and which were and especially yibum where the husband was a pikeach. So yavimto michlafa, ishto b'yavimto lo michlafa. So the Gemara answers, no, there's a big difference between those cases. I could make a mistake when it comes to cases of two cases of yibum, but I'm not going to make a mistake if I allow divorce in a case where the person themselves married the woman. That's not going to confuse me about a case where there was yibum involved. So Gasrina now 1 second, but still in our second answer we said that we're worried about a death, the death of a deaf mute brother, because maybe in a different case will allow the divorce where the brother who passed away is competent, is able to speak and hear. So no, umigasrina. So the Gemara asks, umigasrina cherish atu pikeach. Do we in fact make such a gezerah that we're worried about allowing divorce in a case where the brother is deaf and mute, because of maybe we'll allow a divorce in a case where the brother is fully competent? Because we don't do that. Because look at this Mishnah that we have in Seches Yevamos. V'hatanan shnei achin charshin nesuin shtei achayos b'kot. If two brothers marry two sisters who are both capable of are hearing, but the brothers are not. So shtei achayos charshos, or you have two deaf mute sisters that marry two brothers. Shtei achayos achos b'kachot ba'achas chachereshes, or two sisters, one competent and one deaf. Or and so two deaf mute sisters, nesuos l'shnei achen, who are married to two competent brothers, pikchin, o l'shnei achen chershin, or to two deaf mute brothers. So we've now gone through almost all of the possible cases. O l'shnei achen echa pikeach ve'echad cherish. In all of these cases, if the brothers died childless, the widows, if one of the brothers dies childless, so the widow is exempt from chalitza and from yibum, because they are because of these two women are sisters. The im hayu nachriot, but if the two wives are not related, yichnesu, then the brother can do the yibum. And he can even divorce them. So this shows that because one of the cases involves a deaf mute brother, two deaf mute brothers married to two competent sisters, and so as a result, we say that specifically they're allowed to divorce, and so it shows that we're not concerned about a yavama from a competent brother, and therefore creating a gezerah about a yavama that fell from a deaf mute brother. So ela mechavarta to kiddushanin mikara. So we have to go by the original answer, and again, our original answer is that we're talking about where the brother in the yibum case. We're talking about a yibum case, and we're talking about where the brother was able of marrying biblically because he was fully capable, fully competent. And so, therefore, that's the situation that we're talking about. And so, as a result, that's why in one case we can say that gestures and lip movement don't work for a deaf mute from birth, but they because we're talking about a situation where the marriage was one of yibum. Okay, so now that we've covered that, so now the Gemara is going to clarify that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was actually disagreeing with the Tana Kama in that brisa and not just explaining, because sometimes when you use the language of Bemed Dvarim Amurim, you're actually explaining and not disagreeing. And so we have Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Chalukin alav chaveirav al Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's colleagues, they disagreed with him. So meaning that there was a disagreement, and that in fact, although we have the position of Rab, we also have a conflicting position. So Amar Abaye Afananani Tam Tanina, we actually have a Mishnah that suggests this. This is a Mishnah in Yevamos. This is also the Mishnah in Yevamos. So because what does it say? Nishtas if she becomes deranged, if she becomes insane after the marriage, lo yotzi, he's not allowed to divorce her. Nischarish hu o nishtata, if the husband becomes deaf mute or he becomes insane, lo yotzi olamit, then he's never allowed to divorce his wife. Well, my olamit, what does it mean that forever? Lav aval gav de yachol adaber b'toch aksav. Doesn't that imply that even if he's able to write, communicate in writing? So that would suggest, according to Abaye, that in fact we have now two different opinions. We have the opinion of Rav and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that says that if you can communicate in writing, you're allowed to get divorced. But we have this Mishnah that is in Yevamos that says that no, it does not mean that you're allowed to get divorced. You're not allowed to get divorced, even if you can communicate in writing. Well, Amar Rav Papa said, Ilabda Ashmina Rabbi Yochanan. If not for Rabbi Yochanan's teaching, that in fact that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's colleagues disagreed with him, Hava Amina, I would have thought Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the Farushi Taima de Tanakamahu to Asa, that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was just explaining the first opinion, my Olamit, and in that situation, what would Olamit mean? It would mean Afagap de Chazina lay de Charif, that even if we saw that the person was clearly intelligent, it wouldn't be enough unless the person is actually able to write. Inami, look at the Rabbi Yitzchak. Or alternatively, when we would say that, what does it mean in that Mishnah that Olamit? It's highlighting a point suggested by Rabbi Yitzchak. The Rabbi Yitzchak, Dvar Torah Shota Miskareshes. Really, according to the Torah, the first case of that Mishnah, of those two cases that we just quoted, the woman who goes insane can be divorced because because a man can divorce even a competent woman against her will. Again, this is according to the law as it existed at the time of the Gemara. But eventually we adopted the rule that a woman needs to give her consent to be divorced. And why is it that the rabbis then said that she can't be divorced? So that people don't treat her inappropriately, that because nobody is there to take care of her, and now she has a husband, and we want that husband to continue to take care of her. And so as a result, we won't let him get divorced. But what does olamit mean in that situation? So olamit means biblically. So we don't say olamit when it comes to the woman who becomes insane, because biblically she could get divorced. But when we say olamit with respect to a man who becomes a deaf mute, or who becomes deaf and mute, or a man who becomes insane. So in both those situations, he's not. When we say olamit, we're saying he can't get divorced because it's biblically prohibited. He's biblically incapable of getting divorced. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah returns us to the concept of whether an agent can pass along a verbal request to do an action. So what we called mile mimseran l'shliach, do words get passed along to another agent, or mile lo mimseran l'shliach? And we'll see that there's actually an apparent inconsistency in this Mishnah. So Amr lo nichtav get li'ishtecha. If a person is asked by several people, should we write a get for your wife? Amr lahen ksuvu, and he says to them, write it. Amr lasofer v'kasav, and then they tell a scribe to go write it. Ula'edim v'chasmu, or they tell witnesses and to go sign, and they tell witnesses to go sign it. Afal pisha kasvuhu v'chasmuhu unisanuhu lo. And now, even though they had it written, they had it signed, and they gave it to the husband, because of an unisanola, and he takes it and gives it to his wife. So it certainly looks like everything was done at his request. Hare get batal. This is not a valid get. Why is it not a valid get? Because ad sheyomer l'sofer ksov v'la'edim chasomo. Because you have to say to the sofer, write it, and you have to say to the witnesses, sign. And here, the man himself, the husband himself, didn't tell them. It was the people who came and asked him. They're the ones who gave him the instructions. Now, remember that we had in the last perek, we had a Mishnah that said that, in fact, if you were to tell a group of 3 people to give a get to my wife, then that group of 3 people would be empowered to go ahead and do so. So now we analyze the beginning of our Mishnah. Taima delo amar tnu. The reason that it seems like from the beginning of our Mishnah that this didn't work is because the person said to them ksovu. He told them right. He didn't say tnu. He didn't say just give. But ha amar tnu. If, as Rashi explains, he had only said tnu, well then nosnin. Then it seems that they would have been able to have the appropriate power to write and give the get. So Mani, who is that view? That's Rabbi Meir. Amar Mile Mimser and L'Shliach, because he's the one who says that you can pass words along from one shliach to another. Because what are the people who asked the husband going to do? They're going to tell a scribe to write the get, and they are going to tell the witnesses to sign the get. And so that is only according to Rabbi Meir, who says that you can pass the word along. But Ema Seifa. But now let's take a look at the end of our Mishnah, because what did it say? So you have to say to the sofer, to the scribe, write, and you have to say to the witnesses, sign. Who's that like? Asan la Rabbi Yossi. That's like Rabbi Yossi. To Amar Mile lo mimser and l'shlich, because he's the one who says that you can't pass along a verbal command. Reisha Rabbi Meir b'sefer Rabbi Yossi. So in second, we have in our Mishnah, the beginning part seems to follow Rabbi Meir, and the end follows Rabbi Yossi. So we're going to have 5 different answers, 5 efforts to answer this. The first one will clearly work, and it won't be until the 5th one that we'll have a real alternative. Ain, Reisha Rabbi Meir b'sefer Rabbi Yossi. Well, the easiest answer is this one, which is to say the beginning reflects Rabbi Meir and the end reflects Rabbi Yossi. So Abaye Amar Kula Rabbi Meir. Now, so Rabbi Abaye says we can offer a second possibility. Maybe the whole Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir. And here's what we're talking about: Delo Amar Tnu. That the point is that the concern is that the husband didn't say give, and so that's why, as long as the husband doesn't say give, well, then you have to tell the witnesses, the scribe directly, and the witnesses to sign. Well, 1 second. Well, then the end of our Mishnah should have been different, because if tenu itself would be sufficient, why not say at the end of our Mishnah that the get is going to be void until the person says tenu back? So Ella Hachab. So therefore, we have answer 2A to our effort, or which I've listed here as number 3, which is sort of like a minor modification. So what's that? So that is, here's what we're talking about. Delo Amar L'Bei Tlasa. So maybe we're talking about a situation where he was not talking to 3 people. And so as a result, even if you were to say tenu, you need to have it to a beis din. That's what we saw earlier, that in the last parak. Well, that doesn't work, because then you should just be able to say, the end of our Mishnah should have said that until the husband speaks to 3 people and says tenu. Ella Kula Rabbi Yossi. So rather, it must be that our entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. And here's what we're talking about. Delo Amar Imru. We're talking about a situation where the husband did not tell the shluchim, the agents, he didn't say that they should specifically tell a third party. That's the case of Amar Imru, meaning to say. So Ihachi Achi Yomer Imru Mibaile. Well, then in that case, in that case, we should actually say the end of our Mishnah should have said that it's not going to be a kosher get until the husband specifically tells the agents to go ahead and tell other people. Moreover, does Rabbi Yossi actually agree to this concept of that if you tell people to tell somebody that it's going to be valid? Now, this just points out a key question, because the question is why is it that if I tell you to write something for me, you cannot go and tell Mark, why don't you write it for David? There are 2 possibilities. One is it's a problem in my authorization. I told you, and therefore you don't have the ability. And if that was the issue, well, then if I were to tell you to go ahead and tell somebody else, well, then that's totally fine. I've given you the authority. That's Amru Imru. but it could also be that the underlying item that you're doing is something that is not capable of being conveyed. Meaning, even if I were to tell you that you should tell somebody else to write, because the thing that you're passing along is just a verbal command, that doesn't have enough substance to it. On the other hand, if I tell you to deliver something to Lori, and you end up going to Mark and say, why don't you deliver it to Lori? That's different because you have the item. Let's say it's the computer that I'm lifting up and messing up the picture. So that you would have something that you could hand to Mark, and then Mark would hand to Lori. And so as a result, maybe that's the issue with Mimsura, with the concept of whether or not an oral command is capable of being conveyed. And so as a result, and here we get we have a problem because Rabbi Yossi seems to not agree with the concept of Imru Omer Imru, that I can go ahead and tell somebody to tell somebody. Because what did we have? We have a Hatanan, Ksav Sofer V'Eid Kasher. If the sofer not only writes the get, but he is one of the witnesses of the get, and this is in a Mishnah at the very end of our Masechet that we'll learn in a couple of weeks. So that is considered a kosher get. And Rabbi Yirmiyah says Chasam Sofer Shaninu, that we're talking about where the sofer writes his signature. But Rav Chisda must nisin money, and Rav Chisda said, "Who is that Mishnah like?" As we turn to Ayin Bet Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi to Amr Milelo Mimser and L'Shliach, because he's the one who says that words can't be transferred. And so, why is that important? Because the fact that he says that words can't be transferred ensures that we're not accidentally passing on the wrong message. Because what's our concern? We'll see it inside in a moment, because the Gemara will explain the concern. But the concern is if I tell you to go and write a get for my wife, and I tell two other people to serve as the witnesses, there's a concern that one of the witnesses will say, "Listen, it's disrespectful that that David asked you to write the get and not sign the get. Why don't you serve as the witness?" Well, that would change my instruction. And so as a result, we have to be worried about that. If we allow one witness to tell another witness to do, one person to tell another person to do something, well, then we're playing a game of telephone, so to speak, and we have to be worried that the message didn't get passed along accurately because somebody was concerned about the respect being shown to somebody. So here, on the other hand, if Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, says that you can never pass along words, well, then we don't have to worry about it. So let's now see the question. And if you say that Rabbi Yossi actually agrees that when the husband says, tell somebody to do something, then you can actually, that it works. But we're going to end up with a destruction. Because the husband might tell two witnesses, go tell a scribe to write this get, and go tell these other two people to sign it, and they might be worried about insulting the scribe, and they'll allow the scribe to sign, and the husband will not have told them that. And so as a result, by violating the husband's instructions, they will effectively be creating an invalid get. So as a result, it can't be. Our fourth answer is also rejected. And so as a result, Ella Mechavarta, we have to go back to the first answer and say that the beginning of the Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir, and the Reisha Rabbi Meir, the Sefer Rabbi Yossi, and the end of the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi. But now we have Rav Ashi offering an answer. Rav Ashi Amar, actually, in answer number 5, Kuli Rabbi Yossi. It all is Rabbi Yossi. And in fact, we can have Rabbi Yossi not allow Amru Imru. But Velomi Baika Amar. This Mishnah is set up in a style of not only this, but even in this case. Lomi Bayecha Delo Amar Tanu. Not only is it not going to be a valid get when the person when the husband does not say tenu, but rather he says just kosvo. Ela afilu amar tenulo. Even if he were to say tenu, it would not be a good get, because again, Rabbi Yossi says that the person who's instructed has to be the one who writes the get. And not only is it going to be a problem where the person doesn't speak to three witnesses, even if he were to speak to three witnesses, it wouldn't work. And not only that, it's not only problematic if the person didn't say tell, but even if the person said tell. But even if the person said tell, it also won't work. So there we have it. We end up with, actually, I see I skipped a step. So we actually end up with six statements, six teachings that come out of this Mishnah, that all is according to Rabbi Yossi. And Tanya Kavasi the Ravashi, we have a brisa that supports Ravashi. Ksav sofer lishma, if a scribe writes a get for a particular woman, v'chasmu edim lishma, and the witnesses sign, aval b'sheksavuhu v'chasmuhu v'nusanuhu, even if everything is written, given, and everything is fine, v'nusanula, and the husband gives it, hare get batal, it's all void, it's all nullified. Why? Ad sheyishmeu kolo. You need the scribe, everybody, to hear the husband's voice. Sheyomer lasofer ksov v'le'edim chasamu, and for the witnesses to write. Okay, so yishmeu, right? What is the point? Is ad sheyishmeu la'apukim miman da'amar moda Rabbi Yossi ba'omer imru, and this highlights that this shows that Rabbi Yossi does not, in fact, agree to the concept of omer imru. But rather says that it's not enough to say somebody to tell, but rather, even if you were to tell say to a witness, go tell somebody to do something, that would not work. And kolo, the fact that we reference his voice, la bukim id Rav Kahana amarav, and that shows that somebody disagrees with Rav Kahana in the name of Rav, because Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav that writing is sufficient, and here we see that in fact even writing is not sufficient. You actually have to hear the voice. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. Again, we're trying to get a little bit further. So because tomorrow we'll finish, tomorrow we're off, and we'll finish Ayin Bet on Friday, and complete Ayin Gimel as well. Zegitech imati, zegitech micholi. If the person were to say to his wife, this is your get if I die, this is your get from this illness, and Rashi explains that it means that after the illness, meaning after the person dies, or this is your get after death, all of those are going to be problematic. You haven't actually said anything, because a get can't take effect after the husband dies or after the wife dies. Once there's death, there's no get. But if you were to say, so lo omer klum, you haven't said anything. If, on the other hand, mihayom imati, if the person says, from today if I die, me'achshav imati, from now if I die, then harei zeh get, then that would be a valid get. However, mihayom ula achar misa, if you say from today and after death, get veino get, then it's a valid get and a non-valid get. What does that mean? It really means it's uncertain. We have an uncertainty, and so we have to treat things strictly in both directions. The imay, so if in that situation the husband were to die, choletzes velomis yabemis, the wife will have to do chalitza if the husband dies without children, because maybe they're still married, and lomis yabemis, and she can't marry the brother because maybe they were divorced. So that's the situation. If a husband were to say, this is your get from today if I die from this illness, and then he seems to get better and he actually goes out into the marketplace, and then he gets sick again and dies, so we estimate him, we figure out, we try to analyze the situation. If the person actually died as a result of the first illness, get, then it's a valid get. Being lav, ain't no get. But if it's not a valid get. Okay, so Alma, so it seems from our Mishnah, the words imati, that if I die, so then kol achar misadami, it's like saying after death, right? Because I said zegitech imati, it's treated just like zegitech la'achar mitza. that in both cases the get is void. V'hadar tani, but then you taught mehayom imeti, that from today if I die, me'achshav imeti, or from now if I die. Well then, and we said that in those situations it was a valid get. Well, alma imeti lav kalachar misadami. Then it's not like after my death, because what did we say with respect to mahayom lachar miti? We said that situation was uncertain. So why isn't it uncertain? Why is imeti treated differently from achar misa? So Amar Rabbaye, imeti shtei lashonos mashma, that if I die, it implies two different things. Mashma b'mi'achshav, it can imply both from now, umashma k'la'achar mita, and it also implies after I die. So we're unsure. So Amar Allah mehayom, if the husband says from today, imati, if I die, well then commanda Amar Allah me'achshav dame. And then it's as if he said to her that it should take effect now. But lo Amar Allah mehayom. But if he does not say the words from today, so Kimanda Amar Lala Akar Misa Dami. Well, then we say that the words imeti is like saying Akar Misa. So we've now explained that apparent inconsistency, and now we're ready to say, if I die, that once we said that saying imeti or Zeki take mecholi zeh or Zeki take Akar Misa, that it's lo Amar Klum. But we're going to see that actually there might be some uncertainty in that situation, but we'll pick up with that, God willing, tomorrow. So I wish everyone, thank you, God willing, on Friday. So wish everybody a meaningful Tisha B'Av, 7:45 on Friday, same regular time and channel, and look forward to continuing our learning together. Again, reminder that no Daf Yomi, neither in person nor on the internet on Zoom tomorrow, but God willing, we'll pick up from here on Friday. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
You put tefillin on tomorrow?
We do put tefillin on tomorrow. We put them on in the afternoon.
In the afternoon.